Today we jump into chapter 6 of the book of John. And in this chapter we come across one of the most spectacular miracles we see Jesus perform, the feeding of the 5,000. Now I love how the Gospels work together in telling the same story. Now this story is one of the only ones that is recorded in all four Gospels. So this tells us it's an important story, but we also get to see four different perspectives of how the event played out. So not only do we learn a few things about Jesus and his power, but we also learn a few things about what it takes to follow Jesus. So let's dive into the text and read John 6, 1 through 15. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. Now when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one of them to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many people?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and sat down, and about 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the signs Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Now, right off the bat, we see a characteristic of Jesus in this story. He has compassion for his people who have traveled so long to hear him. Jesus cares about the well-being of his people. Now, how cool is it to see that Jesus uses us as a part of his ministry? How about that little boy in the story? Out of all the people in that crowd, the boy is the one with food. Now, I don't know this, but I'm willing to bet that he wasn't the first one that the disciples asked for food. He probably saw them coming. He knew what they were going to ask. And honestly, if I'm putting myself in that situation and thinking about how far away the nearest food source was, it's easy for me to think, man, I think I'd hide that food. I'd keep it for myself and my family. But the boy decided to share what he had and not put himself first. So what do we have in our hands? What can we give to Jesus to help further the kingdom here in Siloam Springs? It's easy to think, well, I don't have that much to offer. I'm too young or I'm too old. You can say those things, but at the end of the day, those are just excuses. We just saw what Jesus can do with a little boy, some bread, and some fish. He took those small objects and used it to bless thousands of people. How about we take a look at another story in the Bible where God uses a simple object to show his power? The story of Moses in Exodus chapter 4. Now this is the story of Moses where he sees the burning bush and where God spoke to him in a burning bush. God spoke to him and he said, "You will be the one to lead my people, the Israelites, out of slavery." Now Moses, he was 40 years old when he fled from Egypt, and he was 40 years old when he spent 40 years in the desert. So this makes him close to 80 years old, in his 80s. So he's an old man at this point. And he started to give God all the excuses that he could think of. He looked at God, he talked to that burning bush, and he said, "Who am I that I should be doing this?" He asked God, "What if they think I'm crazy? Or what about this? What if they don't believe me?" And then the next thing he said, "God, I'm not a good speaker." And then finally Moses told him one more excuse. He said, "Send someone else. Send someone that's better than me." And God's response to all of these things were similar, but I can sum it up by saying, God told Moses, "I am going to be with you." And then God continues to talk to Moses. He says, "What is that in your hand?" Moses said it is his shepherd's staff. So God told Moses, "Throw it on the ground." And when he did this, the staff turned into a snake. And through that, God showed Moses how he can use a simple object like that to show his power. God had chosen Moses to be his representative to Pharaoh. Guys, when we surrender to God, our time, ability, and our resources, he always gives back in abundance. Just like with the fish and the bread in this story, there was plenty left over. After everyone had ate until they were full, there was still plenty. Or just like Moses, who he didn't think he had much, but God showed him what he can do with that staff. Moses got over himself and decided to let God do what only God can do. All we have to do is take that first step in making ourselves available to God. He'll show us how greatly we can be used to advance the kingdom. And now surrendering and being willing to give God our gifts, that's a starting point to a relationship with him. The young boy took that first step of obedience in a relationship with Jesus. Surrendering, it's a crucial place to start. But if we do not surrender, we will not be able to have that deep personal relationship with Christ. We do not want to just start here and then do nothing. We want to be striving towards a relationship with Christ where we completely and fully abide in him. Surrendering is the starting point, but it's where we want to stay. And we learn that from this young child in this story and also from Moses in Exodus chapter 4.